name is Bo Rohde. As mentioned, I'm an applications expert out of the Houston, Texas office. And today we're going to be talking about getting started with Mastercam 2022 Mill. We're going to start off with importing or bringing in a part file that's been created elsewhere, say as a solid part or a step file. We'll set up some stock with that. We'll talk about some level management and managing our part, as well as bringing in some fixturing, be it a vise, a pre-made fixture, as well as putting toolpath to this, and talk about a few little tips and tricks along the way that might help you out in the future in creating your Mastercam Mill part. So let's get started. So first thing, I've got a simple blank instance of Mastercam, or a new instance of Mastercam 2022 open. And the old traditional way was to go to File, and then you could go to Open. But in Mastercam 2022 and some of the previous versions, we can simply drag and drop files. So I already have a file open, and I'm going to go ahead and drag this part file in, and this is the part that we're going to be using. So you can see by simply just holding down my left mouse button, I can drag that thing right on in there. So we have a part file. That's good. Let's go a little deeper here. So next thing we're going to need is a machine. We got a part file, so we got to get us a machine. So in our machine tab at the top, I'm going to come over to Mill, and I'm going to just left click. And today we're going to just use our default mill inside of Mastercam. If you need to add your machine or add a machine that you have listed, you can always go to Manage List, and once this populates any of the machines that you have listed in here, you could simply left click and add that machine over to the machine definition menu. We can say OK to that, and now when we go to our mill, we'll have, for instance, this generic Haas 3-axis mill. So let's just go with that. It's a simple 3-axis part, nothing exciting, but a common everyday part we might see. So inside of our properties for our generic Haas 3-axis mill, I'm going to expand the properties, and I'm going to go to my Files tab. Now you notice inside of our properties we have Files, Tool Settings, and Stock Setup. We'll get there. Hang tight. We want to take a quick look inside of here. We want to make sure that we do have our generic Haas mill. We have a post for our generic Haas mill and where that post resides. We have our tool library, which is where we'll be selecting our tools from, our operation library, and our operation defaults. And these are all explained in further detail during training. So if you're interested in training, reach out to one of your sales guys. They'll be happy to talk to you about our Mastercam Mill Essentials. We go through that kind of stuff along the way in the training, as well as cover many other tool paths. The next thing we'll look at is our tool settings. In here, you'll be able to set your default program number. You can set your feed calculations from tool, from material, defaults, user-defined type information. Over to the right, we have our toolpath configuration. Mine is set up to assign tool numbers sequentially, warn of duplicate tool numbers, are used tool step pec, and coolant settings. That way when I bring in any type of tool, if it's got coolant turned on, coolant turned off, maybe you're using an air mist, if you have your tool set up that way, it's going to bring in those parameters for you. And down at the bottom, you can also set your sequence numbers, how they start and end. So if you wanted to start with N1 and increment by 10, it's going to post out N1, N10, N20, N30, 40, so on and so forth. Mastercam also has a large selection of material types that you can actually go in and set your tools up to run through the material type for your feed calculations. Again, they can cover all of that inside of our Mill Essentials training. For the stock setup, we're going to look at our stock plane. Our stock plane is at top. For shape, we have rectangular, cylindrical, solid and mesh, and a file. In this case, we have a rectangular part, so obviously we're going to go with rectangular. And we're going to look at our stock setup for our part. So right now we have all zeros, X, Y are all zeros. And we're going to look at our options. We have select corners, bounding box, all surfaces, all solids, all entities, and we can unselect all as well. I'm going to use a bounding box today, just because in a bounding box I like to be able to have lines created once I create my stock. I can use those lines for geometry if I need to. So let's look at bounding box. In our bounding box manager opens up, and the first thing we get is this little tooltip. Says select one or more entities, or Control A. I'm just going to come over and left click on my part, and I'm going to say end selection, and you'll see it starts giving me a preview of my part and my stock that's going to surround it. So inside my bounding box manager, over to the left, I have rectangular, cylindrical, spherical, and wrap as well. And again, we go through all of this in training. Today we're going to just stick with rectangular. Again, that's the type of part we have. So looking at our rectangular settings for our origin, this box is what sets the pace for where the material will be added. So if any of the left boxes are checked, it's going to add material to the right. Any of the right boxes are checked, it's going to add material to the left. And anything through the center will distribute it equally in X, Y, or Z. So right now I'm going to leave it set right in the center. I'm going to make my X size 13 inches and hit enter. And as soon as I hit enter, you'll see the stock start to grow. So you see the stock grows a little bit there. For Y, we're going to go ahead and go just 6.5 inches. So I'm just going to type in 6.5, enter, get a little bit of material on that outside edge. And then for my Z, we're going to have material top and bottom. Now you may have it distributed equally depending on your material size. For this instance, I'm going to add 25 thousandths to the top side of my part, and then I'm going to add 225 thousandths to the bottom. We've got to have something to hold on to with our fixturing, which we're going to use a vise here in just a minute. So for my Z, I'm going to go ahead and select the bottom, because just like the left and the right, if I select the bottom, I'm going to add material in a positive Z. So I'm going to come over here and just left click over to the right of the 1875, and I'm going to go plus 0.025, and I'll hit enter, and it adds that little bit of material to the top of my part. So far so good. And then I said we were going to add 225 to the bottom, just keeps the numbers equal to 250. So I'm going to go plus, first I got to move my little dot here. So now I'm going to say plus 0.225, enter, and now I've added material not only to the top of my part but as well to the bottom. So that gives me a little something to hang on to. Still in my bounding box, I've got my material size set. I like to come down, I mentioned, to have lines for my geometry for my stock. So I'm going to make sure on my create geometry I have lines and arcs, and I'll green check, and you'll see now that I have lines and arcs of where my stock, or what represents my stock. Back over in my stock setup, you'll see now we have 6.5 in Y, 13 in X, 2.125 in Z, and then also over here for our stock origin, you see the 25 thousandths worth of stock above my Z that we added there in the bounding box. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my display for now of the stock, and the reason why is it's going to add little red dotted lines over the top of my stock, and for me, I just don't like to see anything extra in there that I don't need. I'm going to go ahead and green check out of my stock setups, and now you see I have my part as well as my stock around my part. If you just happen to be wondering what the little points are in the center of the holes, I actually added some holes into this model for us so I could go over some of the drilling features as well. So moving forward, we're going to go do a little bit. I talked a little bit about covering some management or level management for being able to keep things organized as we go along. So in my levels tab, if you see now, I've got one level and it has 15 entities. So it has everything that we've put on this part in one place. So I like to keep things a little organized. So I'm going to go ahead and come down here and create a new level. So I'm going to do level 2. And I'm going to go ahead and just call this exactly what it is. Boundary box, or bounding box, excuse me, for stock. And that's exactly what it is. I'll hit enter, and now it's created me a new level up here. And now I just need to get the entities off of level 1 down to level 2. And I'm going to do that by using my quick mask function over on the right hand side of the screen. There's different things in here: point, lines, arcs, splines, everything. I want to use this one that's about the 5th one down, and it says select all wireframe entities. So if I left click there, you can see it picks all of the wireframe entities on my graphics window, as well as those 2 dots, and that's fine, those 2 points that I brought up. And I'm going to right click, and in the top of my selection bar I'm going to come over to change levels. I'm going to left click on there. In my change levels, I do want to move these, and I'm going to say use active level, because level 2 is my active level for my bounding box for stock. I'll go ahead and green check, and you'll see that now I have 14 entities that have all been moved. So now I have the option to turn this on and off. I can turn on level 2 and get my stock back if I want it, and I can turn it off if I don't need it. So just a little management, a little organization for you. So now that we have our stock set up and we're getting a little bit into our level management here, I want to go ahead and bring in our fixturing, or bring in our vise. So again, in the old way of doing this, we would go into file again and go to merge, but there's a trick to get it in a little bit faster, kind of the drag and drop kind of thing. I'm going to open up the file that I originally started out with, and you'll see in here that we have a Vise _xt. So I'm going to select that Vise file. I'm going to hold down my control key and my left mouse button, and I'm just going to drag this over into my graphics window and release. You see that now I was able to drag in my vise, which we'll call my fixture, that we're going to actually use and set up to represent how we would hold this part. First thing I want to do is get this vise aligned. Since I am in merge pattern, I have the option inside here to go ahead and use some of our alignment features. And in this case, my vise is already in my top orientation, so I don't have to do anything real drastic with it. But I'm going to go ahead and just use the dynamic function, and I'm just going to left click on dynamic over here on the left, and it's going to take me to my dynamic manager. It's telling me to pick a nome and origin position. So I'm going to come over here to the right, and I'm going to just let this snap to the center of that line. And I know it snaps whenever I get that little symbol that shows the center point of that line, so it knows that I'm at the center. And I want to go ahead and just left click. And I want to get this vise down below my part. For me, it just makes it easier than trying to we're just going to drag this vise over. But it makes it easier for me to go ahead and make a movement instead of trying to do it all in one shot. So I'm going to go ahead and left click on the up arrow on the Z, and I get this little scale, and I'm just going to drag this down below my part. Makes it a little easier for me. Now I want to get it where I got the edge of my stock at the edge of my vise, so I'm going to left click on the Y, and notice my vise starts moving again. I'm just going to come up and let it snap to the corner, this lower corner. Once it snaps, I'm just going to left click again, and now I've got it oriented to where I can just move it straight up in Z to the height that I want it to be. So I'll come click on Z, and I'll move this up, and I'm going to let it just snap to that corner. And now I've got my part sitting at the top of my vise jaw, so I need to move my vise up just a little bit to get it to where I'm grabbing on some material. So I'm going to go ahead and left click on my Z again, and I'm going to move up just a little bit. I was at what was it, 5 inches, I believe, 5/125. I'm going to go ahead and just move it up just to the bottom corner of my part. So I let that snap just to the bottom corner of that part. So that puts me right to the edge of that part. That looks good. And probably need to move it down just a little, so I'm still in my dynamic. I'm going to left click. I'm at 5.25 right now. I want to drop it down to 5.2, so I'm going to left click on my Z arrow, and I'm just going to type in 5.2 and enter again, and that sets my part just below the bottom of the part, so I should be hanging on to about 200 thousandths worth or so. The only thing left that I need to do now is I need to bring my back floating jaw and the jaw carrier up to the edge of the back of my stock here, so I can stay in this dynamic motion by simply coming over here and hitting the blue check mark. And what that does is it sets everything that I've done, and it allows me to move something else if I need to. So it's saying select my entities that I want to move or copy. So I'm going to go ahead and select both the floating jaw and the carrier in selection. And again, I'm going to come over and let this just snap to the center of the top vise jaw. And I just need to move this vise jaw up to the edge of my stock, so I'll select my green arrow for Y, and I'm just going to come over here and let it snap to the edge of my stock. Now this is where having your stock set up and creating those lines and arcs when we created that solid will help you in setting up your fixturing. So now I have my part, I'm holding onto it in my vise, my stock is set up, and I'm going to go ahead and green check. And I will green check again. I'm finished with merging my pattern, so I'll be done. And you'll see that now I have my part in my vise as it would be in the machine. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Save it as my part file. Yes, I want to replace it. I like what I've gotten so far. And we're going to go back over and we're going to do a little bit of management again in my levels. If you notice in my levels manager, I have Vise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. These are just all the pieces of this vise. So I want to get them all on one level. So again, I'm going to go ahead and say level 3 as my main. I'll go ahead and turn off level 1 and 2. I'm going to Windows select, so I'll hold down my left mouse button, release it, and just drag the window over my full vise. Make sure everything's yellow. Again, I'll right click and go to change levels. I want to move all of this to my main level, so level 3, and I'll green check. Now you notice it's moved all entities to level 3, and I can right click now inside my level manager and say clear all. It's going to clear anything that does not have a level or have an entity on that level. I'm going to go ahead and turn level 1 and 2 back on, and I'll leave level 3 on as well, just so that we have a representation of our vise and we'll be able to see as we start applying toolpath of what it's going to look like. So again, I'm going to go ahead and save my file. I'm going to use Control S, which is save. So Control S will save your part file. And we're going to go start looking at our toolpath. So looking at my part, just turn it in a view that I like to see. First thing we probably need to do is get us some tools loaded. So we need a face mill to face off the top. We're going to need an end mill to cut these slots in the pocket. We need a spot drill to drill the holes, as well as a drill to drill those holes as well. So we're going to go to our machine manager, and we're going to go to our mill tool manager, and we're going to load us some tools so that we'll already have these tools loaded. So I'm going to open up my mill tool manager, and I'm going to turn my filters on to be active, and I'm going to go to filter tool, and I'm going to come over and I'm going to first select a face mill. So I'll double click on my face mill. A lot of times this will come in where they're all selected. If they are, you can always just pick the one you want and double click. So if I double click on face mill, it's not opening up my face mill tools. So I need to turn my tools on. I'm going to go ahead and select my 2-inch face mill, and I'm going to move that to the top. So that's going to be tool number 1. I need to go add some different tools. So again, tool filter, we'll go grab an end mill. So I'm going to double click on my end mills, and we'll grab a 1/2-inch end mill, flat end mill, use my little arrow, move it up to the top, go tool filter again. Again, this is just going through and getting our tools that we're going to need. We'll go ahead and get a spot drill. So I'm going to double click on my spot drill, and we'll grab a 1/2-inch spot drill, move that to the top as well. My tool filter again, we'll go ahead and get our drill. So I'll double click drill, and I'm going to go down and grab a 3/8 drill, move that to the top, and we'll get a chamfer mill, and we'll go ahead and chamfer the edges using model chamfer, which is very nice. You'll see how well you like this at the end of this, and something you don't have to fight anymore. I'm going to go ahead and grab a 1/4-inch chamfer mill, and you can also hold down your left mouse button and drag that. Oh, it says a 1/4-inch chamfer mill already exists. We don't want to add another one. I must have got that tool in there already. Perfect. So I'm going to green check, and now I should have all my tools loaded that I need. So let's look at our first toolpath that we're going to create, which is going to be a facing toolpath. Under my toolpaths tab, I'm going to go to my facing operation, and notice with my wireframe mode selected in my wireframe chaining, it's saying select OK to use define stock. Well, since we went to the means of putting and setting up our stock, there's no need for us to go in and actually select the geometry. We can select the geometry if we want, but Mastercam's smart enough to know that, hey, we don't need to. So I'm just going to go ahead and green check out of my wireframe chaining, and I'll follow my process for my tool. I'm going to use my 2-inch face mill. It's going to face my top. We can set up our speeds and feeds, and we'll leave that to your discretion. For my cut parameters, for my cutting method, I'm going to go ahead and use dynamic. That way we get a dynamic motion from the outside to the inside of the part. And for my settings over here to the right, I'm going to go ahead and say my step over distance, I'm going to change that to say 25%. And my stock to leave on floor, I'm going to set to 0. For my depth cuts, I'm going to say 0 depth cuts. We're just going to take that 25 thousandths in one pass. And then for my linking parameters, again, I already have my clearance, my retract, and my feed planes all set. We set up our stock, so Mastercam already knows that there's 25 thousandths above. And for my depth, I'm just going to verify this. I'm going to come let it snap to the top of the part just to verify that we are at 0. So I'm going to left click on depth, and I'm going to let it snap to the center of that circle, and we are at 0. We can go in and check our planes, make sure that we are set to top and top, and that's about all we need to worry about from there. One of the new features in Mastercam 2022 is generate toolpath. And we'll see how that works in our next operation that we select. So I'm going to go ahead and green check. And this is going to regenerate, and you'll see that we have our facing going around our part, working from the outside to the end, and cutting down to our top of stock 0. Now for the drum roll. For everybody that is just has standard mill without mill 3D, in 2021 you did not have the option to use OptiRough. With Mastercam 2022 with standard mill, you now have the option to use OptiRough. And if you don't know what OptiRough is, OptiRough allows you to basically select a solid model like what we have here and set in some conditions to where you can cut deeper and cut multiple levels with inside your part, or multiple heights I should say, as well as make cuts coming back up from those depths to catch the areas that you may have missed that need to be taken care of. So we'll take a look at this. I want to select OptiRough. My 3D high-speed toolpath dynamic OptiRough window will pop up for me. The first thing it's asking is for our machining geometry. We have no entities selected at this point. So down here at the bottom right it says select entities. Now it's saying to select a solid face, surface, or mesh, and it shows different ways inside of this tooltip of how to select all of the entities. So I'm going to make this one real easy. You can triple click. So if I come over and go over to the top of mine and just click 3 times, 1, 2, 3, notice it selects all of my entities. Or you have the option of coming up here and turning off faces and just selecting a solid. So either way works, a triple click or changing your selection to a body selection up here. I'm going to go ahead and end my selection. Now you see we have 440 entities. We have 50,000 worth of wall stock as well as floor stock. We have no avoidance region that we're wanting to avoid right now, so we don't need to select those, but we could if we needed to. For my toolpath control, I have a containment boundary. I want to keep my tool contained to an area. So I'm going to go ahead and select my containment boundary, and that's going to be my stock. So again, creating this line geometry that we created when we did our bounding box is coming in handy now. Wireframe chaining, I'm going to make sure I'm in wireframe mode, C-plane, and I'm just going to select that top edge of my stock, or what was my stock. That's just giving Mastercam an area that we know where the material is and where I need to start from. So I'll green check, and I'm going to go through my strategy. So my strategy is already set for from outside, so it's going to start outside of my material. We are going to go to the tip, it's grayed out. For our compensation type, we can say inside the containment, to the center of the containment, or outside. I'm going to go ahead and select outside. I want it to come from the outside of my part. We do have some other options in here like skip pockets. We can tell it to skip certain pockets. We can either say skip all or smaller than. Again, this information is covered in a lot more detail inside of our Mastercam Mill Essentials training that you can sign up for. I'm going to go ahead and select my tool. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch flat end mill, and I'm going to put a comment, just rough, and that's just going to rough the part down. For my cut parameters next, I'm going to jump back. We also have the option to select holders, and we have multiple holders that you can choose from, anywhere from CAT 40s, 50s to HSKs. So for this one, I'll just go ahead and give you an example of it. Let me move up and find about a 1/2 inch holder. It might be a little bit long, but that's okay. We can also change the projection of the tool. So that tool's hanging out quite far. So I'm going to go ahead and change my projection to maybe 2 inches. That way I know I can get to the bottom of this without having to worry about my holder or anything. Now we'll get into our cut parameters. And we'll do a climb cut. We want a climb cut on this. We have our step over values, so how far is our tool going to step over? So I'm going to go ahead and put it to 15%. Step down, I'm going to go ahead and change that to a 1/2 inch. For the rest of this, this is just our back feed and micro lift, so if it has to pick up, it helps it avoid the chips. We also have the option for motion gap size retract. There are some options in there. Again, guys, we cover all this really in depth inside of our Mill Essentials training. For right now, I'm going to leave my steep and shallow where it's at. Linking parameters, this is your entry, exit, motion in and out of the cuts. These can be covered in a lot more detail as well. For now, that's all I'm going to look at. Everything else we're going to leave to default, and I'm going to go ahead and green check, and we'll let this regenerate. And now that we have it regenerated, we can kind of see our toolpath, and notice we're getting a fairly decent toolpath around there, and it's roughing out the majority of that part for us. I'm going to go ahead and save this for now. I'm going to go ahead and select all of these, and we'll run a verify and kind of see what we get from there. So first thing when we get ready to run our verify is I want to come up here and select my simulator options, and that's the little black box with the little settings or gear. And I just want to come in and make sure that I have stock setup selected. And for my fixtures down at the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my fixtures, make sure I'm on levels, and I'm going to turn on level 3. This way, whenever I run my verify, it's going to bring my part, my stock, and the vise that I set up as well. So I'm going to select this icon, which is our verify selected operations, and I'll left click on there and let that open. And notice we have our face mill, our stock, and our vise. And I'm going to slow this down just a little bit because it's going to run fast. I'm going to select a stop condition, say operation change. And we'll go ahead and change our colors so each tool is a different color. So I'm going to hit play. We'll let this face this off. And now it comes to our 1/2 inch end mill that's going to do all of our opti-rough. And it is making a few passes around there to make sure we're safe. Now it's going to start taking the corners off. I'm going to go ahead and speed this up just a little bit so we can get on through it. And you can see now that we've pretty much roughed our part down to almost a near net finished part. We're staying just above our vise, which is nice. We know that we're not going to run into our part or run our end mill into our vise. So that looks pretty good. I like it. I'm going to go ahead and green or X out of there, and we're going to set up, just because this is a longer operation, we're going to go ahead and set up a stock model that we can use for the rest of our programming on this part. So whenever we get ready to run verify again, we don't have to rerun all of these operations. So I'm going to set a stock model up here on number 2. I'm going to come up here in my toolpaths tab again, come over to stock model. I'm going to go ahead and give this a name, and I'm just going to call it op1 rough. Our stock plane is going to be top. For my color, I'm just going to go pick a random color for this to be. So once it regenerates, I'll be able to know the difference between my actual part model and my stock. For my initial stock shape, I'm going to go ahead and go to rectangular, and then I'm just going to come down here and say use my stock setup. We've already set that stock up, so there's no need for us to go try to reset the stock up if we've already done it. And then we'll need to come over to the left and set up our source operation. So the source operation is what operations are we going to use to create that stock model. So we want to use our facing and our 3D high-speed dynamic. I'll green check. It's going to regenerate and rebuild. And as it's regenerating here, we'll give it a minute. It's got a lot of things. There we go. So there it regenerated. And now we have something that looks real similar to our part in a roughed out state. So pretty nice. Anything that we change above that in facing or the 3D high-speed OptiRough will affect our stock model. So be aware of that if you do make a change in these operations, you'll have to regenerate the stock model as well. The next thing that I want to cover or talk about is some advances in our 2D dynamic. So we do have a little bit of material left around the bottom of these faces here that we need to take care of. We could take care of this face, go ahead and finish it in our OptiRough as well, but we're going to take care of it in just doing with our 2D dynamic, because I want to cover some of that. So in a 2D dynamic, I'm going to go ahead and just left click on my 2D dynamic, and notice now my stock model has went away. And for the first one, we're going to just use a machining region. I want to finish this face, and I'm actually going to use the 2D dynamic. So my machining region, I'm going to use my solid selection. We don't need wireframe anymore in Mastercam. And I'm going to select loop and a face. And I want to come in and just select this outside edge, because I just want to finish this face right here. So I'm going to go ahead and green check. For my machining strategy, I'm going to say from outside. But I do need to give it some avoidance regions so that we know to stay away from these two top circles. So for my avoidance region, I'm just going to come select here and here. I'll green check. If I go to preview chain, now you see the red area is the area that we want to cut. The blue region is the area the tool has to roam outside of that, and it's going to stay away from our two center bosses. I'm going to go ahead and green check. I'm going to go grab my tool. We're going to use the same 1/2 inch flat end mill, and I'm just going to put a little finish face for a note for us. For my cut parameters, since this is a finish toolpath, I'm going to leave my distance for my step over a little bit larger, so we'll go with 50%, so half the tool. For my stock to leave on walls, again, I'm going to leave this at 50 thousandths, and then for my stock to leave on floor, I'm going to tell it 0. I don't need to worry about any of my other settings. Again, keep things simple, and I'm going to go ahead and green check. And you can see there that we've got a nice finished toolpath that will finish all the corners for us and get that top face finished. I'm going to go ahead and save my part. And now we're going to look at what I just mentioned a minute ago about our automatic regions. We need to come in and finish the bottoms of these floors. We can select all those floors at one time. So a while ago I talked about, we had to go in and select that avoidance region. And there's also air regions as well. So an air region is an area outside of, say, this pocket that now Mastercam will recognize that for us without us having to select that. So I'm going to go to my dynamic, 2D dynamic. I'm going to use my automatic regions this time. So I'm going to select automatic regions, and it automatically goes to a solid and to a face selection for us. I'm going to select the floor of each one of these or each one of these little cutouts here, and I'm going to go ahead and select the floor of this pocket. We need to finish that floor as well. Once I'm done, I'll go ahead and green check, and if I preview chains, you'll see that we're coming outside of our part for the outside steps, and we're cutting the inside part here. So I'm going to go ahead and green check here. For my tool, we're going to use the same tool. For my cut parameters, we're going to use the same step over distance that we had before, and we're going to leave the stock on walls. Again, guys, These tool paths like this are roughing tool paths. They will leave a faceted look along the wall potentially. So it's always good to come back and rerun a contour around them. For our entry motion, I'm okay with the profile. My linking parameters will need to change. So my clearance is set to 2 inches, retract, all absolute. For this one, for my top of stock, I'm going to go leave my top of stock just at 0. So I can just type that in as 0. For my depths on this, so that I can get to all of the floor depths on here, I'm going to change it to incremental and 0. It's going to recognize the bottom chain of that floor for me. I'm going to go ahead and green check, and you'll see that my tool is going to come in. It's going to finish the bottom of all those floors. And we'll look at verifying what we've done so far. So I'm going to go into my verify or my simulator options. And I'm going to come down and make sure that my stock model is checked now. And I'm going to use my Op1 rough. And I'm going to go ahead and green check. And I'm going to select option 4 and 5. And I can select 2 operations by simply holding down my control key. I'm going to run my verify now. And I'll go ahead and run my top option. And guys, I just want to mention, I typically would probably not finish that floor with that much material left on it. You can go in and make some changes to the OptiRough and get that floor finish down much closer to the bottom of those floors by using your step-up values. But for this demonstration, it's nice just to kind of show you the options of how things work. So that looks pretty good. We see a little bit of wall material left on here as well. But that's because we have left 50 thousandths on these walls. So we'll take care of that with our contour operation, which we're going to go to next. I'm going to go ahead and save my part, and we're going to start off with going through setting up some contours to finish up this part. So I'm going to select contour. I'm on my solid chaining, and I'm going to go ahead and chain all this to the bottom of the floors so that I can actually be able to program all of this with just one operation. So for the first ones we're going to do is these 2 here. So I'm going to go ahead and select the bottom. I'm going to need to reverse that chain, and I'll select the bottom of that one. I'll reverse it as well. Then I need to get the inside of this pocket. So I'll get the pocket there. And then for my outer ones, I'm going to turn off my partial loop, and I'm going to use my outer shared edges. And once I go and select the pocket, you'll see it's just going to grab that inner edge. So that one and that one, and this one. Pick that one, this one here. And notice I am selecting close to where I want it to start, so that I am climb cutting out of there. And I'm going to go ahead and green check. I have all of my finishing passes except for my outer edge. So we need to finish that one as well. So let's go ahead and go back to a loop, and I'll turn that off, and I want to just grab the bottom edge of the part. So now we can finish everything in one contour operation. I'll green check to that. For my tool, we are going to use the same 1/2 inch flat end mill, and I'm just going to call this finish passes. For my cut parameters, I am going to be where and left to my tip. I'll go ahead and leave sharp corners, make sure my stock to leave on walls is set to 0. My contour type is just simply going to be a 2D. I don't need any depth cuts. For my lead in and lead out, we'll go ahead and leave it at 25% is good, 15, 90. Make sure everything on the right is the same. I don't need to break through, no multi-passes. For my linking parameters, I already have my clearance plane set 2 inches, retract, feed plane. My top of stock is actually going to be 0. I can verify this by going top of stock, pick the top of stock, and I'm going to set my depth incremental value to 0. That way it finishes to the bottom of the floor everywhere. I'll go ahead and green check, and it looks like I have all of my finished passes complete. That looks pretty good to me. So just 6 tool paths, well, minus 1 stock, I've pretty much got this side of the part completely programmed. So let's move on to our drilling. So we got 2 holes in the center of this part that we need to drill, and we're going to go ahead and spot drill them, and we'll go ahead and drill them as well. So first thing I'm going to do is save my part, and I'm going to go select my drilling operation. That's in my toolpath tab, and I'm going to come over and I'm going to select the top edge of this boss, and I'm going to select the top edge of that boss as well. And you see the diameter of those is 431.3. That's the top edge of my chamfer. I'm going to go ahead and green check. For my tool, I'm going to use my 3/8, my 1/2 inch spot drill. I already have a comment for spot holes. For my cut parameters, again, since I set my settings up, it's going to bring it as a drill counter bore. Tool axis control and hole segment is nothing we need to worry about in just our standard 3D mill. For my linking parameters, again, clearance plane 2 inches, absolute. I'm okay with that. I am going to say use clearance only at the start and end. So it's going to read my retract value. So it's only going to retract 100. Go over and do the other hole. That's perfectly okay. My top of stock is 0. And again, guys, it's just pulling this information from setting our stock. But I don't know if any of you have ever used it for calculating the depth of a spot drill. If you don't know the diameter of that top or how big or how deep you need to go, we have the option down here for a depth calculator. So I'm going to select the little depth calculator, and it brings up my calculator. Use current tool values. So the diameter of my tool is a 1/2 inch. The finished value, it was for something I don't remember, but we can go find out. So I'm going to right click inside of this window, and I'm going to go to diameter of an arc. When I select diameter of an arc, I'm just going to pick that same diameter that we had, the 431.25. We don't have a tool tip, or we don't have a flat on ours. It comes to a point, so I'm okay with that. The next thing that I'm going to look at, and something that I always do, is say overwrite depth. Mastercam will hold modal values from previous drilling operations. So if there was a value in our depth down here, we would want to override that with the depth that we're setting. And what this depth calculator does is it takes the angle of the spot drill, and when it makes contact with this face or with this outer diameter, it'll stop on that contact. So it sets that value for us. We do want to make sure that our tip comp is turned off, and I'm going to go ahead and green check. I'm going to backplot just this first one for you so you can see what I'm talking about. You can see that my spot drill now has come straight down when it makes contact. My next operation or next move is up in Z and goes to the next hole and does the same thing. So it sets your counter bore, or your chamfer rather, to what you need. I use that one a lot. So for our next operation, we're going to use drilling again. So I'm going to go to my drill tool path, and this time I'm going to select both of these holes. So if you read your tooltip up here, it says select one or more entities. I can go select them individually, or I can use control click to select all matching radiuses of a solid feature. Again, we've not created any wireframe for our part. So by just simply going in and selecting the inside of this hole and letting it highlight, I'll hold down my control key and left click. You'll see that I get an arrow facing up on both of these. It will match those diameters or the radius of each one of those holes for us. And you can see over here in my features that it's selected solid feature 1 and 2, both 375 diameter, which is the diameter of those holes. So just by using the control and click, I can select multiple holes without having to go select each one. I'm going to go ahead and green check, go to my tool, I'm going to select my 3/8 drill, I'll give it a comment, drill holes, we only got 2. Again, you can go set your holder up. We're going to go straight to our cut parameters. Notice it has set my drill to pec drill already. and I'm going to go straight to my linking parameters. Calculate incremental values from the holes and the lines. Mastercam sees a line down the center of each one of these holes, and it will calculate the depth if you use an incremental value. So I do have absolute set here for 2 inches above the part. Retract. Notice my use clearance only at the start of the end. That stayed modal from my previous operation. There's my retract. My top of stock, I'm going to go ahead and set that to 0 as well. And I'm going to go ahead and set this to incremental. And it's going to see that line from the top of the hole to the bottom and set my depth for me. So we could be drilling multiple depth holes, and we could, with the same drill, they could be all 3 different depths, and we'd be able to drill those holes. The next thing I want to do is set a tip comp. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my tip comp on. I don't want it to break through, so I'm going to go ahead and set that to 0. And it's going to comp the length of the tip of the tool, and it already knows the tip angle, and it pulls this information from what you've set up in your part or for your tool. So I'll go ahead and green check, and if I go ahead and set this, we can watch it drill, and we'll see that it will drill just to the bottom of the hole. See if I can stop it right there. Let's back it up to that last one, and we're going to change our transparency over here to shaded. Let's go to wireframe. We can see it that way, and you can see that my tool is going just to the bottom of that hole. So not having to do a whole lot of work to get to what I need for my holes. So another neat feature in Mastercam 2022, I'm going to go ahead and save this again just to make sure we keep it going in the right direction, is being able to chamfer or chamfer all of these edges. A lot of times, we want to put a chamfer down on the bottom like of these pockets right here. That can be an issue for us if figuring out, how far we can start, where we may have to adjust the start and end of it. We end up with a couple of different operations, maybe for different situations. With model chamfer, we can do it in one operation. So let's go take a look at model chamfer. So I'm going to expand my 2D gallery. I'm going to go down to model chamfer. Now, we do have to be thinking about our selection as we do our model chamfer, how we select our edges, but if we select them properly, we don't have any problems. So I'm going to go ahead and use my chain geometry. It's a little different. It doesn't jump right into your chain geometry. And so I'm going to go select my chain geometry. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and select a loop, which is what we want. I'm going to do the top edge first, and I'm going to go ahead and reverse that, and I'm going to use this one and reverse that, or make sure that was going the right direction. I'll jump over here and grab this pocket, and I'm going to go ahead and come over to this corner and get the outer edges. Now, what I was talking about earlier, if we want to chamfer just these outside edges, that'd be kind of difficult to do with the chamfer tool, trying to figure out, how much do I need to shorten my entry and exit so that I don't bump into those walls, but I still want to get a chamfer there. So if I come over and use outer open edges for my selection, so I'll turn off my loops and turn on outer open edges. Watch what I can do. I can come over and select this face, select this face, select this face, and notice it's just picking that outer edge. I've got them all selected. I'm going to go ahead and green check. For my tool, I'll select my 1/4 inch chamfer mill. And notice I already have a comment, chamfer edges. For my cut parameters, we're going to be where, left. All this is, standard, like standard contour. For my chamfer width, I'm going to go ahead and just put a 10 thou chamfer on there. And I have the option of using a top or a bottom offset. In this case, we'll go ahead and just use a bottom offset. I like to use both depending on what I'm doing. For my lead in and lead out, we'll go with the same 25%, 25 radius, 90. I can push all that information over to the right. For my linking parameters, I have a 2-inch and a retract of 1/4 and a feed plane of 0.1. I'm okay with that. And I'm going to go ahead and just green check. So just by making a few simple selections, I have all of my chamfers done. But the main thing that I want you to see is if I go to top view here and we go to backplot, I'm going to run this through. There's just top circles. There's that one. Now it's going to run around our outside edge. But now I want you to look what happens when we go to this first edge right here. When we come in, notice it knows exactly where that solid model is. It's going to stay away from it. You don't have to guess how far you need to shorten that chain to get it to where it doesn't hit that wall. Now, just so you can see it for demonstrative purposes here, I'm going to go in and I'm going to go back to my toolpath type. So here it's showing my solid model. It's seeing this solid model. I'm going to put a big number in this side clearance. We're going to go 125. I'm going to green check and regenerate for me. You can see now it's staying, keeping that tool 125 thousandths away from that solid model. So I don't have to put anything in there. It'll see it, but I just wanted you to see it, firsthand, that it does stay away from that wall. So what model chamfer will allow you to do is essentially the way I did my contour toolpath. This will allow you to get all of your chamfers done, inside, outside, and even open pockets like that, just chamfering that edge in case that's something that you need to do in the future. Well, I hope this helps you, get you started in Mastercam Mill. Again, guys, look into training. You can talk to your local sales guys. We're always look forward to training you guys up and getting y'all to be better Mastercam users for sure. And we'll see y'all on the next Cam Skills events or at an event near you, hopefully.